Emily sat in her small apartment staring at the email that had just popped up on her screen. It was from Daniel. Her boss, the man everyone in the office admired yet also feared a little because of his sharp mind and quiet authority. He had asked her to join him on a road trip to a client meeting 2 hours out of town. It wasn't unusual for employees to travel, but it felt different when the invitation came directly from him. Emily hesitated, reading the words over and over. Why her? She wasn't the most senior. She wasn't even the most confident. Still, she typed back a polite of course before her nerves could stop her. The next morning, she found herself waiting outside her building, watching the city wake up. The sound of cars rushing past mixed with the cool bite of early air. Then she saw his black SUV pull up. Daniel stepped out wearing a crisp shirt with the sleeves rolled casually to his elbows. His usual formalities softened by the morning light. "Good morning, Emily," he greeted, his tone warm yet steady. She nodded, sliding into the passenger seat. Her heart racing faster than it should. The first few miles were filled with silence, broken only by the hum of the engine. Emily fidgeted with her hands, unsure what to say. She had always known Daniel as the composed figure behind a desk, focused on numbers and deadlines. Now, being this close to him, she noticed details she hadn't before, the way his jawline tensed when he concentrated on the road. The quiet patience in his posture. The faint trace of cologne that lingered in the car. To her relief, Daniel finally spoke. "I appreciate you coming with me today. I thought it might be easier than sending you alone on your first client visit." His voice was calm, but there was something personal in it that made Emily glance at him. She smiled politely. "I'm glad to help." At first, their conversation stayed strictly professional. They talked about the presentation, the details of the meeting, the kind of questions the client might ask. But as the city faded into stretches of open highway, their words began to wander. Daniel asked her what kind of music she liked. When she shyly admitted she loved old classics, his lips curved into a small grin. "My mother played those on long drives. Do you mind?" He turned on the radio, and a soft melody filled the car. That simple act shifted the air. Emily relaxed, leaning back as the road stretched before them. Soon they were talking not about work, but about life. She learned he grew up near the coast, spending summers by the ocean with his father. His voice softened when he described those days as if those memories lived close to his heart. She found herself opening up too, telling him how she loved to read late at night, how she often escaped into books when the world felt heavy. Daniel listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole presence. He didn't interrupt or rush her. He simply watched the road, nodding and asking thoughtful questions. That struck Emily most of all. She wasn't used to being listened to like that. It made her feel seen. The miles passed quickly, the sky brightening above them. Emily noticed how different Daniel was outside the office. He still carried that quiet authority, but there was an ease about him, a gentleness she hadn't expected. She caught herself laughing at one of his stories about a disastrous business trip years ago, and for a moment, it felt like she wasn't with her boss at all, but with someone who could beef. She dared admit it her friend. Yet, beneath the laughter, a question lingered in her heart. Why her? Why did he ask her specifically to come along when he had so many others to choose from? Every time she thought of asking, her courage faltered. Instead, she watched the trees blur past, trying to quiet the mix of nerves and curiosity building inside her. As they drove deeper into the countryside, Daniel's tone shifted. "Do you ever feel like life just moves too fast?" he asked suddenly. Emily turned to him, surprised by the question. "All the time," she admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm running just to keep up, and no one even notices." His eyes flicked toward her briefly, then back to the road. "I notice," he said softly. The words were simple, yet they landed with a weight she couldn't ignore. Her heart skipped, and she quickly turned to the window, pretending to study the passing fields. She didn't know what he meant, or maybe she did. But she wasn't ready to face it. The drive that began with silence now carried a quiet intensity. The air between them was charged, filled with things unsaid. Emily wanted to ask what he meant, why he seemed so different with her today. But before she could, Daniel shifted gears, steering the conversation back to safe ground. They spoke again about the meeting, about strategies and clients. But his earlier words lingered in her chest like a secret she wasn't sure she was supposed to hear. By the time they neared the small town where the client waited, Emily realized something had changed. This wasn't just another ride, another task, another day at work. Something deeper had begun to stir, something she didn't expect and wasn't sure how to handle. She tried to steady herself, reminding her heart that Daniel was her boss, nothing more. But as the car slowed at the edge of town, she couldn't shake the feeling that this trip wasn't just about business. What she didn't know was that Daniel had his own reason for inviting her, and that reason would slowly unfold in ways she couldn't have imagined. The sun was dipping low when Daniel pulled the car into a small roadside cafe, the kind of place most travelers passed without noticing. Emily followed him inside, grateful for the break. The air smelled of fresh coffee and baked bread, and the hum of quiet conversations filled the room. They chose a table near the window, the fading light spilling across the wooden surface. Emily wrapped her hands around the warm cup Daniel ordered for her. She hadn't expected this stop, and she hadn't expected the shift in his eyes either. They weren't sharp with office focus. They were steady, patient, almost searching. "You've been doing good work," Daniel began, his voice softer than usual. "But I want to know more about you." Beyond the reports, the words unsettled her. Bosses didn't usually ask personal questions, at least not like that. Still, his calm gaze made her feel safe enough to answer. She spoke slowly at first, admitting things she rarely said aloud, that she often felt invisible in groups. That she had poured herself into work after her last heartbreak because it was easier than risking disappointment again. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't give her the polite nods people usually gave when they weren't truly listening. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his attention fixed on her as if nothing else in the world mattered. When she finally fell quiet, embarrassed by how much she had shared, he spoke in a low voice. "You're not invisible, Emily. You've just been standing with the wrong people." Her breath caught. Simple words, but they hit deep. She tried to laugh it off, stirring her coffee to hide her flushed cheeks. But the warmth spreading through her chest wasn't from the drink. It was from him. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel empty. Emily stared at the rain streaking down the window, her mind racing. Why was he telling her this? Why did he sound like someone who cared not as a boss, but as a man? When they returned to the car, the tone of the drive had changed. The road ahead stretched into twilight, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. The hum of the tires felt like background music to thoughts neither of them spoke aloud. Emily tried to lighten the mood. She asked about his favorite books, his favorite cities, the places he'd seen on business trips. He answered, but each response carried a piece of him she hadn't seen before. He told her about the summer he spent in Europe after college, about standing in front of the sea in Portugal and realizing how small he was compared to the world. His eyes softened when he spoke of his late father, a man who taught him to work hard but also to live fully. Listening to him, Emily felt her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just admiration. It was the dangerous awareness that she wanted to know him more deeply than she should. But she also noticed something else. Daniel was holding something back. His grip on the steering wheel tightened when he thought she wasn't looking. His jaw clenched when she asked if he ever got lonely, traveling so much. He gave a faint smile, but his silence said more than his words. Finally, Emily gathered the courage to ask, "Is something bothering you?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe one day I'll tell you," he replied softly. Her pulse quickened. One day, he didn't dismiss her question, didn't push her away. He left a door open, just enough for her to wonder what lay behind it. The rest of the drive carried a strange energy. They spoke, they laughed, but underneath every word lingered a quiet pull. As if both of them were aware of the line between them and yet inching closer to it. Emily found herself studying the way his profile looked in the fading light. The way his voice dropped when he grew serious. The way he glanced at her as though he was memorizing her face. She reminded herself over and over this was her boss. This was work, nothing more. But her heart didn't listen. Her heart was caught in the way he made her feel seen, valued. Important in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. The rain began to fall harder, drops hitting the windshield like a quiet drum. The wipers moved back and forth, steady and rhythmic. Emily sat in silence, her mind a swirl of questions she dared not ask. Why did he bring her? Why did he care about her stories, her past, her pain? And what was the secret hiding behind his calm words? As the night drew closer, the road darkened. The glow of headlights from passing cars painted brief flashes across Daniel's face, highlighting the tension he tried to mask. Emily wanted to reach into the silence to break through whatever wall stood between them, but she hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the answer, what it would mean if she got it still. One truth had already taken root in her heart. This was no ordinary trip. Something unspoken had begun between them, something fragile yet undeniable. And though she tried to bury the thought, she knew the journey ahead was about to change more than just her job. It was about to change her life. The first drops of rain tapped gently against the windshield. But within minutes, the sky opened, pouring so heavily that Daniel had to slow the car. The wipers moved back and forth in a frantic rhythm, but even they couldn't keep up with the storm. Emily shifted uneasily in her seat as the world outside blurred into streaks of water and shadow. "Looks bad," Daniel muttered, scanning the road ahead. The highway stretched into darkness, headlights reflecting off sheets of rain. Finally, he sighed and turned into a narrow road leading toward a small inn with a faded sign glowing faintly in the night. "We'll stop here until the storm passes," he said. Emily nodded, though her heart was still racing from the intensity of the drive. The inn was quiet, almost too quiet, with an old wooden door and a warm yellow light spilling from the windows. Inside, the air smelled of burning wood, and the crackle of a fireplace greeted them. The receptionist gave them keys with a polite smile, and soon they were seated near the fire, waiting for the storm to ease. The room was small and cozy, with soft chairs and shelves lined with old books. Emily sat opposite Daniel, the flames casting shifting shadows across his face. For the first time, she saw him not as her polished boss, but as a man worn a little by life, softened by the glow of firelight. He leaned back, his usual guarded posture melting away. "This reminds me of when I was younger," Daniel said suddenly, his voice low. "My father and I once got caught in a storm like this. We stayed in a roadside cabin playing chess until morning." He paused, eyes distant. "I miss those days." Emily watched him quietly, sensing the weight in his words. She had never heard him speak so personally before. "You don't talk about him much," she said gently. "He passed away a few years ago," Daniel admitted, his tone steady but heavy. "Since then, I've thrown myself into work. It's easier than slowing down and realizing what's missing." The honesty in his voice struck her deeply. She understood that feeling, hiding pain beneath busyness, pretending life was full when it was really empty. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The storm outside raged, but inside, the silence between them felt fragile, intimate. Then Daniel turned his gaze to her. "Emily, can I tell you something?" Her breath caught, but she nodded. "I didn't ask you on this trip just because of work," he said. His words were measured, careful, but they carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "I wanted to know you. Outside the office, away from reports and deadlines. You remind me of something I thought I'd lost the chance to feel close to someone." Again, the air seemed to still around them, the storm fading into the background. Emily's heart pounded. She had felt the pull between them, but hearing him say it left her speechless. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his expression both vulnerable and uncertain. "I know this might sound sudden, and maybe it's not fair of me to say it, but I couldn't ignore it anymore." Emily's thoughts spun. Part of her wanted to pull back, to remind herself that he was her boss, that this was dangerous, complicated. But another part, the part that had been quietly drawn to him since the moment he picked her up that morning, longed to believe his. Words. Her silence stretched, heavy and trembling. Daniel, noticing her struggle, gave a faint, almost regretful smile. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table between them. Emily froze. The box looked delicate, almost too intimate, sitting there under the glow of firelight. She stared at it, her mind racing. "Daniel, what is this?" She whispered, "Something I've been holding on to." He said softly, "I wasn't sure when or if I'd give it to someone, but tonight felt right." Her fingers hovered above the box, shaking slightly as she opened it. Inside lay a simple silver bracelet, its surface catching the light. A small charm shaped like a compass hung from it. Elegant and understated. Emily's breath hitched. It wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtful, personal, a gift that spoke of meaning rather than money. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Why would you give this to me?" Daniel's eyes held hers steadily. "Because you once said you felt lost after everything you'd been through. I thought, maybe this could remind you that you'll always find your way. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of that journey." Her chest tightened, emotions flooding in all at once. Surprise, disbelief, warmth, fear, and something deeper she couldn't name. Tears pricked at her eyes, not because of the gift itself, but because of what it meant. He had been listening. Truly listening. She closed the box gently, her hands trembling. The fire crackled between them, the storm roaring outside. Emily's hands trembled as she held the velvet box, the silver bracelet glimmering in the firelight. She could still feel Daniel's eyes on her, steady, waiting, but not demanding. Outside, the storm thundered against the windows, yet inside this small inn, time seemed to pause. She had never expected this, never imagined that her boss, the man she admired from a safe distance, would hand her something so personal, something that felt less like a gift and more like a promise. Her throat tightened, and for a long moment she couldn't speak. Finally, she whispered, "Daniel, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now," he replied gently, his voice low and calm. "I just wanted you to know what I see in you, Emily. You think you go unnoticed, but you don't. Not by me." Those words hit deeper than anything she had heard in years. It wasn't just about the bracelet. It was about being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist slowly, the cool metal warming against her skin. The compass charm rested gently at her pulse, as if reminding her of something she had almost forgotten, that she wasn't as lost as she believed. Emily looked up at him, eyes shining. "You've already given me more than I expected, more than I thought I deserved." Daniel leaned back, relief softening his face. He didn't push, didn't rush her, just allowed the silence to stretch comfortably. The fire crackled, filling the quiet with warmth. For a moment, the world outside, the storm, the office, the rules that kept them apart faded away. There was only the glow between them, fragile and powerful at the same time. Still Emily's mind whirled. This wasn't simple. He was her boss, her leader, and she was still finding her place in his world. Accepting his gift meant more than wearing a bracelet. It meant opening a door she wasn't sure she had the courage to step through. She wanted to tell him all of this, but instead, she held on to the charm and said softly, "This means a lot to me." Daniel smiled, not triumphant, but tender. "Then that's enough for now." The storm raged on through the night, and they stayed by the fire talking about little things, books, travel, memories that shaped them. Emily laughed more than she had in months, her guard slipping away. Each story he shared revealed another layer of him, not the perfect, polished boss she knew at work, but a man who had loved, lost, and still carried hope quietly in his chest. When the fire burned lower and the storm softened into a steady rain, Daniel finally stood. "It's late. You should rest," he said, his tone warm but careful. He didn't try to extend the moment beyond what it was. He simply guided her to her room, pausing at the door. "Good night, Emily." She hesitated, her hand on the bracelet, her heart racing. "Good night, Daniel," she whispered. Their eyes met briefly, holding something unspoken. Before he turned and walked away, that night, lying in the quiet room, Emily stared at the ceiling, the bracelet catching faint light on her wrist. She replayed every word, every glance, every pause. She had come on this trip thinking it was only work. But it had become something else, something that left her both terrified and hopeful. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world fresh and bright. When Daniel met her in the lobby, his usual calm expression had returned. But she noticed the way his eyes softened when they landed on her. On the drive back, their conversation was lighter. But beneath every word was a quiet current, an understanding that things between them had shifted as the city's skyline came into view. Emily's heart ached with a bittersweet truth. She didn't know what would come next. Their roles, their responsibilities, the unspoken rules, they all stood between them. Yet she also knew that something had changed forever. That bracelet wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder that she had been seen, chosen, valued in a way she never expected. When Daniel pulled up in front of her building, he didn't say much. He simply glanced at her wrist, then back at her face, his expression gentle. "Take care, Emily," he said quietly. She nodded, holding his gaze a second longer than necessary. "You too, Daniel." As she stepped out of the car, she felt the weight of the moment press into her chest. Nothing had been promised, no future mapped out. But deep inside, she knew the road they had taken together wasn't just about business, it was about beginnings. Walking up to her door, Emily touched the bracelet again, the compass charm cool against her fingertips. She smiled faintly, realizing that sometimes the smallest gifts carried the loudest truths. And though the journey ahead was uncertain, she wasn't afraid. Because for the first time in a long time, she felt less lost. And somewhere inside, she hoped Daniel felt the same. Asterisk.